number 12 Ole Miss, who will travel to South Carolina. This game will be 3:30 Eastern time on ESPN. Now, after averaging 55 points a game in their first four non-conference games, Ole Miss was held to 17 last week against Kentucky. They have not been held to 24 or fewer points in back-to-back games in 5 years under Lane Kiffin. South Carolina, on the other side, allowing 17 points per game this year. So if you're going to score, it's going to be hard to come by when playing against South Carolina. Now, LSU ultimately did score quite a bit in the second half, but it's going to be tough sledding for Ole Miss. Let's start with the questions, all right? Number one, can Ole Miss block them? Pretty simple question, right? Can they block them? South Carolina this year has 14 sacks. That is 16th in the FBS. But every single Power 5 team that currently sits in front of South Carolina has played 5 games. The Gamecocks have played 4. So on a sacks per game rate, South Carolina is among the nation's elite. 10% of their opponents' dropbacks have resulted in sacks, and South Carolina is 9th in first pressure time at 2.5 seconds, meaning that their first pressure is getting there, and it's getting there quickly. The crazy thing about it is they're not like a crazy heavy blitz team either. It's not like they're overloading protection with blitzes and corner blitzes and safety blitzes. That's not really who they are. They say, hey, we got 2 great defensive ends, Kyle Kennard, Dylan Stewart, who, by the way, major oversight by me on Wednesday's show. If you missed it, I told you 3 freshmen that have really popped for me this year. I gave you the 2 that were obvious, and Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, and I gave you Dylan Raiola. Total oversight. Dylan Stewart should have absolutely been on that list. So I apologize to the South Carolina faithful, but I appreciate you keeping me honest on that one. Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart, plus a very underrated defensive tackle group that will anchor this team. Now, Ole Miss offensive line has had a bunch of adversity. They've had injuries to the first 5 games. They've had a lot of amazing numbers offensively, but the offensive line really hasn't been that great. Against Kentucky, their best competition so far, Jackson Dart was sacked 4 times, and the run game averages 3.2 yards per carry. So it forced Ole Miss to become a little more one-dimensional, and as a result, Kentucky was able to contain a group that had seemed to be unstoppable in the first few weeks. Let's go next to question number 2. How healthy is LaNorris Sellers? Now, LaNorris Sellers, he's the quarterback. He's the quarterback for South Carolina since the beginning of the year. He got hurt in the ankle sprain that ultimately, I think if he stays healthy, look, if ifs and buts for candy and nuts, like we all have a Merry Christmas. I get all that. But I really believe this. If he probably stays healthy, it would have been a lot more difficult to contain South Carolina in the second half of that game against LSU. So I think he would have given them a much better chance than Robbie Ashford. No disrespect to Robbie Ashford. I think he's extremely, extremely inconsistent and not a guy I trust, just being honest. But LaNorris Sellers, it's not like he's blowing the world away with his own efficiency. He's a 55% passer, about 400 yards through the air, couple passing touchdowns, has about $150 on the ground, 3 scores with his own legs. One of those scores was on a long play. So it's easy to kind of point to LaNorris Sellers, say, yeah, he's a little up and down as well, but he's also kind of a streaky player. When LaNorris is feeling confident and comfortable, he's very, very good. But when he's a little bit unsure, he becomes human very quickly. So it's important for this South Carolina staff to get him off to a good start against what I think is a very underrated defense. Well, they're underrated in many ways. One area where they're not underrated is when it comes to penalties. That's question 3. Ole Miss has got to stop with the penalties. Can they? After back-to-back games, more than 100 yards worth of penalties, most of which, let's be real, are on defense. Last week, Ole Miss had 8 penalties for 53 yards. You're sitting there thinking, that's an improvement, right? That's better. Well, 5 of those 8 were on defense. 3 of those 5 gave Kentucky an automatic first down, 2 of which actually led to one of the 2 touchdowns on the day. I also would contest that on the first drive for Kentucky's offense, Ole Miss got away. with another pass interference penalty in the end zone. Kentucky had to settle for 3, but had that penalty been called, it would have been 1st and goal from the 2. So Ole Miss has to stop with the penalties. It's been huge, because Kentucky was just 4 of 16 on 3rd down last week, but the penalty first downs gave them a lot of life there with some of those drives being extended. Let's go to question 4. Who is going to take some of the pressure off Trey Harris, the receiver for Ole Miss, in the passing game? Trey Harris right now leads the FBS with over 800 receiving yards this season. That is 150 yards more than any other wide receiver. So to think, he is leading the FBS, and the guy that's in second right now is more than 150 yards behind Trey Harris. That's how important he is. He accounts for 36% of the target share at Ole Miss. That's the 10th highest. Others that are in that 35+% target share are Tet McMillan, and then a bunch of G5 guys, basically. G5 teams, frankly, in some cases, where they only have one dude, or they're a heavy run team. So in the rare event in which they drop back and throw it, they throw it in the direction of their guy. So of teams that have normal offenses, yeah, it's basically Trey Harris and Tet McMillan at Arizona. So pretty dang good. The next highest target share on Ole Miss is 12%. You know who that is? Juice Wells. You know where Juice Wells used to play? South Carolina. And I'm telling you, these people in Columbia, South Carolina are very eager to welcome Juice Wells back to Williams-Brice. Now, he finished. They should probably be appreciative of his time at South Carolina to an extent, but not on Saturday. I can promise you that, because back in 2022, he finished 5th in the SEC with 928 receiving yards. Did get hurt pretty much all of last year with the foot injury, but he was an all SEC first team member in 22, according to the league's coaches. So, hey, welcome back, Juice Wells. Can you please take some of the pressure off Trey Harris in the passing game? It would be much appreciated. Trends in the game. South Carolina is 5-3 against the spread in their last 8 games as an underdog of 7+ points. That includes 3 outright wins, by the way. South Carolina has 4 outright wins as a home underdog since 2019 and is tied for the most of any team in the SEC. But Ole Miss, shockingly enough, 6-1-1 against the spread as a road favorite since 2019. That's the second best in the FBS over that span. I'm taking Ole Miss. I think this is a tough matchup for South Carolina. One, I think Ole Miss's defense is really underrated. But I also look at their offense, and I think this tempo is going to wear out South Carolina just a little bit. And I also think South Carolina is more susceptible in the back end defensively to big plays that Ole Miss might be able to create. So I'll take Ole Miss. I think it'll be close. I think it'll be a competitive game there in Willie-Brice.